8, 18, 17.
Welcome to 500 Seconds of Knowledge.
13,
Don't be ignorant.
11.
This is 500 Seconds of Knowledge. Don't be ignorant. And I am your host, The Orange. Today's premise questions, is the Electoral College really racist? As always, let's start with a definition of racist. It is defined as having, reflecting, or fostering the belief that race is a fundamental determining factor of human traits and capacities, and that racial differences produce an inherent superiority of a particular race. The origins of the Electoral College begin in 1787 when the Constitutional Conventional's founding fathers debated for months, with some arguing that Congress should pick the president and others insistent on a democratic popular vote, according to an article found in History.com called Why Was the Electoral College Created? You see, no other country in the world directly elected its chief executive at that time. Further complicating this was a deep-rooted distrust of executive power. One of the delegates felt strongly that Congress shouldn't have anything to do with picking the president, fearing an opportunity for chummy corruption between the executive and legislative branches, while another camp was dead set against letting the people elect the president by a straight popular vote. Some thought the 18th century voters lacked the resources to be fully informed about the candidates. They had no internet or computers. Especially in rural outposts, there were also fears of a democratic mob steering the community astray. Sound familiar? Or appealing directly to the people could command dangerous amounts of power. Out of those long, drawn-out debates came a compromise based on the idea of electoral intermediaries who wouldn't be picked by Congress or elected by the people, but instead the states would each appoint independent electors who would cast the actual ballots for the presidency. Not to be confused with fake electors, but I digress. The biggest problem and the reason the Electoral College is racist is this. According to BrennanCenter.org, the populations in the North and South were approximately equal, but roughly, and here's the part of which to pay attention, 1/3 of those living in the South were slaves, and due to its considerable non-voting slave population, the region would have less clout under a popular vote system. The South did not want to give the slaves the power with the right to vote, but they wanted their slave bodies to count so the Southern states could place representatives as they were assigned according to population numbers. The ultimate solution was an indirect method of choosing the president, one where the slaves' bodies would count for representative purposes only, because the slaves could not cast a single vote. The South gets the best of both worlds. With 93% of the country's slaves toiling in just 5 southern states, that region was the undoubted beneficiary of the compromise, increasing the size of the South's congressional delegation by 42%. History buffs and Hamilton fans are well aware that in its first major failure, the Electoral College produced a tie between Thomas Jefferson and running mate Aaron Burr. This particular process of democracy in 1800 succeeded as one might have expected, based on the embrace of the 3/5 compromise. The South's baked-in advantage, the bonus of electoral votes it received for maintaining slaves, all while not allowing those slaves to vote, made the difference in the election outcome. It gave the slaveholder Jefferson an edge over his opponent, the incumbent president and abolitionist John Adams. That election continued an almost uninterrupted trend of Southern slaveholders and their sympathizers winning the White House that lasted until Abraham Lincoln's victory 60 years later. In 1876, it just got better. Democrat Samuel Tilden won the popular vote, but some electoral votes were in dispute, including those in wait for it, Florida. An ad hoc commission of lawmakers and Supreme Court justices was impaneled to resolve the matter. Ultimately, they awarded the contested electoral votes to Republican Rutherford B. Hayes, who had lost the popular vote. As part of the agreement known as the Compromise of 1877, the federal government removed the troops that were stationed in the South after the Civil War to maintain order and protect black voters. The deal marked the end of the brief Reconstruction era, the redemption of the Old South, and the birth of the new Jim Crow regime. The decision to remove soldiers from the South led to the restoration of white supremacy in voting through the systematic disenfranchisement of black people, virtually accomplishing over the next 8 decades what slavery had accomplished in the country's first 8 decades. So, the Electoral College's misfire in 1876 helped ensure that Reconstruction would not remove the original stain of slavery so much as smear it onto the other parts of the Constitution's fabric. What's clear is that more than 2 centuries after it was designed to empower Southern whites, the Electoral College continues to do just that. The current system has a distinct adverse impact on black voters, diluting their political power. Because the concentration of black people is highest in the South, their preferred presidential candidate is virtually assured to lose their home state electoral votes. Despite black voting patterns to the contrary, 5 of the 6 states whose populations are 25% or more black have been reliably red in recent presidential elections. 3 of those states have not voted for a Democrat in more than 4 decades. Under the Electoral College, black votes are submerged. It's precisely how, as William Buckley might say, the South has prevailed. So let's recap before we wrap this up. This online definition of racism states that it is also called an institutional or structural or systematic racism, a policy system of government, etc., that is associated with or originated in such a doctrine and that favors members of the dominant racial or ethnic group, ultimately serving to preserve the social status, economic advantage, or political power of the dominant group. From History.com, we find the fact in which 3/5 of the enslaved black population would be counted toward calculating representatives and electors and not allowing any of them to vote, allowing these southern states to increase the size of their congressional representation by 42%, allowing those states to win the White House for the next 60 years. So, now that you've been given these facts, what do you think? Don't let the lost cause fool you. I'm the Orange, and I'll talk to you next time.
Thanks for listening to 500 Seconds of Knowledge. Don't be ignorant. Theme music by The Players.